The invitation to Monaco should have terrified me. After everything I'd been through, after all the betrayals and manipulations, another mysterious benefactor offering unlimited power was obviously another trap. But something had changed inside me during Fashion Week. I wasn't the naive girl from Queens anymore. I was someone who had burned down 2 criminal empires and walked away from the ashes. If they wanted to play games with me, I would show them how much I had learned about winning. The address led to a compound that made Victor's mansion look modest. Private peninsula. Armed security. Helicopters landing and departing like a military operation. This wasn't just wealth. This was nation-state level power. And they were interested in me. Marie drove us through security checkpoints that scanned everything from our identification to our biometric data. The guards carried weapons I'd only seen in military documentaries. Whatever this meeting was about, it required the kind of security usually reserved for heads of state. "Are you sure about this?" Marie asked as we approached the main building. "This feels bigger than fashion industry politics." She was right. The compound felt like the headquarters of something that operated beyond traditional business or government oversight. International. Untouchable. Absolute. "I'm not sure about anything anymore," I said. "But I'm tired of being afraid." The main building was an architectural masterpiece that somehow managed to be both classical and futuristic. Marble columns supported glass walls that offered panoramic views of the Mediterranean. Art that belonged in museums hung casually in hallways. This was power made physical. A woman in her 60s met us in the main foyer. Elegant, composed, radiating the kind of authority that came from never being questioned. She wore simplicity like armor. A black dress that probably cost more than most cars, jewelry so understated it had to be priceless. "Miss Chin," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Catherine Blackwood. Thank you for accepting our invitation." Catherine Blackwood. The name triggered memories of newspaper articles and business magazine profiles. One of the most powerful women in international finance. Board member of tech companies, luxury conglomerates, and what appeared to be half the Fortune 500. Our invitation? "There are others who have been following your situation with great interest. Please walk with me." Catherine led us through corridors lined with portraits of people who looked like they could buy small countries. CEOs, politicians, royalty, tech billionaires. A visual representation of global power concentrated in one location. "What you discovered about Viktor and Victoria was impressive," Catherine said as we walked. "But it was also just the surface level. A small regional operation in a much larger ecosystem." We entered a conference room that looked like the United Nations designed by someone with unlimited resources. 30 seats around a table that could have been carved from a single piece of marble. Wall-mounted screens showing real-time data from stock markets, commodity exchanges, and what appeared to be global shipping routes. 6 people were already seated. I recognized 3 of them from magazine covers. A tech billionaire whose companies controlled half the world's data. An oil heiress whose family owned more territory than most European countries. A pharmaceutical executive who had turned medicine into the most profitable industry on Earth. "The Consortium," Catherine explained, taking her seat at the head of the table, "represents approximately 40% of global luxury commerce. Fashion, jewelry, automobiles, real estate, hospitality. When we decide something will succeed, it succeeds. When we decide something will fail, it disappears." The casual mention of that level of control was breathtaking. These weren't just wealthy people. They were the people who controlled wealth itself. "Why am I here?" "Because you've demonstrated something rare in our experience. The ability to destroy established power structures rather than simply being controlled by them." The tech billionaire, someone I'd seen on the cover of Time magazine, leaned forward. "Viktor and Victoria thought they were independent operators. In reality, they were our experimental program. A test to see if fashion industry manipulation could be systematized and scaled globally." My blood went cold. "Experimental program?" "We've been studying human creativity as a commodity for 5 years, Catherine continued. "How to identify it, cultivate it, control it, and harvest it efficiently. Your case was our pilot study. The implications were staggering. My entire struggle hadn't been about 2 criminals trying to control me. It had been about a consortium of the world's most powerful people testing methods for controlling human creativity on a global scale. Viktor and Victoria were our employees," the oil heiress added. "Well compensated, but ultimately expendable. When they began competing with each other instead of serving our objectives, elimination became necessary." "You had them destroyed?" "We allowed you to destroy them," Catherine corrected. "Much more efficient than direct action. And it provided valuable data about how creative individuals respond to systematic pressure." Catherine activated one of the wall screens, showing financial projections that made my head spin. Revenue forecasts in the hundreds of billions. Market penetration analyses covering every continent. resource allocation charts that treated human creativity like any other raw material. "We're prepared to offer you something Viktor and Victoria never could," she said. "Not just success in fashion, but control of the entire creative economy." The screen shifted to show organizational charts of companies I'd never heard of, but which apparently owned every major creative platform on Earth. Streaming services, social media networks, publishing houses, art galleries, music labels, all connected through a web of shell companies and offshore investments. "We want you to run the creative division of our global operation. Full authority over how human creativity is identified, developed, and monetized across all industries." The tech billionaire pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. The contract was thick, complex, and offered compensation that defied comprehension. Not just money, but equity stakes in companies that controlled global culture. "Why me?" "Because you've proven you understand the game being played," Catherine replied. "Most creative people never realize they're being manipulated. They believe in concepts like artistic integrity and independent success. You've seen behind the curtain. You know that creativity without power is just raw material for people with more resources." She was right, and we both knew it. My entire journey had been proof that talent alone was worthless against systematic manipulation and unlimited resources. What would this involve? The pharmaceutical executive spoke for the first time. Global identification of creative talent through social media monitoring, educational partnerships, and psychological profiling. Systematic cultivation through controlled opportunities and manufactured crises. Harvesting through long-term contracts that provide security in exchange for complete creative control. "What you experienced was personal," the oil heiress added. "What we're offering you the chance to implement is industrial. Viktor and Victoria were managing dozens of designers. You would be managing millions of creative individuals across all disciplines." The scope was beyond anything I had imagined. Not just controlling the fashion industry, but controlling human creativity itself. Deciding who got opportunities, who faced obstacles, who succeeded, and who was eliminated. "And if I refuse?" Catherine's smile was gentle and absolutely terrifying. "Then you return to your life as an independent designer with an interesting scandal in your past. Free, but ultimately irrelevant to the larger systems that shape global culture." They gave me an hour to consider the offer. Marie and I were escorted to a private terrace overlooking the Mediterranean, while the Consortium continued whatever other business they conducted from their Monaco fortress. "This is insane," Marie said once we were alone. "They're talking about controlling human creativity like it's oil or steel." "But they're right about one thing," I replied. "Independent creativity doesn't survive against systematic control." I learned that the hard way. The contract was still in my hands. Pages of legal language that would transform me from victim of the system into its architect. Complete control over creative industries worldwide. Resources that could make any artistic vision reality. Power that could protect or destroy any creative person on Earth. "So you're actually considering this?" I looked out at the Mediterranean, thinking about my grandmother's sewing machine and my mother's exhaustion. About 3 years of struggling to build something independent, only to discover I had been a test subject in someone else's experiment. What's the alternative? Go back to designing clothes for people who will steal them, copy them, and mass-produce them before I even show them? Spend my life fighting battles I can never win because I don't have enough resources? The alternative is being yourself instead of becoming them. She was right, but being myself had nearly destroyed me. Being independent had made me vulnerable. Being talented without power had made me a target. "Maybe the answer isn't refusing power," I said. "Maybe it's using it differently than they expect." When we returned to the conference room, Catherine was reviewing financial reports that showed the global creative economy in real time. Billions of dollars flowing through systems controlled by people who created nothing but owned everything. "Have you made your decision?" she asked. "I have a counter-proposal." The room went quiet. These were people accustomed to making offers, not receiving them. "I'll accept your position, but with modifications to the scope and methodology." Catherine's expression was amused but interested. "What modifications?" "Instead of harvesting creativity through manipulation and control, we develop systems that actually support independent creative work. Provide resources without demanding ownership. Create opportunities without manufactured crises." The tech billionaire laughed. "That's charity, not business." "Is it? What if creativity flourishes better when it's supported rather than controlled? What if the current system is actually inefficient because it wastes so much talent through destruction and manipulation?" I pulled out my phone and showed them social media analytics from Fashion Week. "My runway show exposed your experimental program and crashed both Viktor and Victoria's operations. But it also generated more global interest in fashion than any traditional show in history. Authentic rebellion was more valuable than manufactured success." The numbers were compelling. Engagement rates, brand awareness, global media coverage. My truth-telling had been more profitable than years of carefully orchestrated marketing. Authenticity sells, I continued. And authenticity can't be manufactured through control and manipulation. It has to be genuine. What if instead of controlling creativity, we created the conditions for it to flourish independently? Catherine studied me with the intensity of a scientist examining an interesting specimen. You're suggesting we profit by providing freedom rather than selling slavery? I'm suggesting we test whether supporting creativity is more profitable than destroying it. The consortium voted immediately. Not publicly, but through subtle gestures and expressions that conveyed decisions worth billions of dollars. When Catherine spoke, I knew they had accepted my proposal. 6 months, she said. We'll provide you with unlimited resources to test your alternative methodology. If authenticity proves more profitable than control, we'll scale it globally. If traditional manipulation proves more efficient, we return to established methods. The pharmaceutical executive leaned forward. But understand the stakes. If your approach fails, it doesn't just mean return to the old system. It means the old system becomes more sophisticated, more total, more inescapable. And if it succeeds? If it succeeds, Catherine said, you'll have revolutionized how human creativity relates to global power. You'll have proven that freedom can be more profitable than slavery. She slid a different contract across the table. Thicker than the first, but with fundamentally different terms. Instead of controlling creativity, I would be supporting it. Instead of harvesting talent, I would be cultivating it. Instead of destroying independence, I would be enabling it. The resources are the same, she explained. Unlimited budget, global reach, access to every platform and system we control. The only difference is methodology. I looked around the room at faces that represented more power than most governments. People who could reshape global culture with a phone call. People who were willing to bet billions of dollars on the possibility that freedom might be more profitable than control. There's one more condition, I said. Which is complete transparency. No hidden agendas, no secret manipulation, no experimental programs that people don't know they're part of. If we're testing authenticity, we have to be authentic about the test. The room was silent for several minutes. These were people unaccustomed to transparency, accountability, or limitations on their power. Finally, Catherine nodded. Agreed. Complete transparency about our methods and objectives. I signed the contract. Within 2 weeks, the infrastructure was in place. The Creative Freedom Initiative operated from offices in 12 countries with budgets that could fund small wars. Our mission was simple: provide resources, opportunities, and support to independent creative people without demanding ownership or control in return. The initial projects were modest. Scholarships for fashion students that didn't require working for corporate sponsors. Grants for independent designers that came with no strings attached. Mentorship programs connecting established artists with emerging talent without contractual obligations. But the real innovation was systemic. We created platforms where creative people could connect directly with audiences without intermediary control. Funding mechanisms that supported artistic risk-taking. Legal resources that protected independent creators from exploitation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Applications from creative people around the world who had been searching for opportunities that didn't require surrendering their independence. Artists who had been forced out of traditional systems because they refused to be controlled. Media coverage was intense and largely positive. The story of a designer who had exposed fashion industry corruption and used the settlement to fund creative freedom resonated globally. We were featured on magazine covers, documentary films, and academic studies. But the real test wasn't media attention. It was financial performance. 6 months later, I presented results to the consortium that exceeded everyone's projections. The Creative Freedom Initiative hadn't just been profitable. It had generated more revenue than Viktor and Victoria's operations combined. Creative people who feel supported rather than controlled produce more work, take greater risks, and generate more cultural impact, I explained, showing performance analytics on the wall screens. Authenticity doesn't just sell better than manufactured content. It's also cheaper to produce because you're not spending resources on manipulation and control. The numbers were undeniable. Higher engagement rates, lower operational costs, greater cultural influence, more sustainable long-term growth. Supporting creativity was more profitable than controlling it. The traditional model requires massive resources to identify talent, manipulate circumstances, and maintain control, I continued. Our model identifies talent that identifies itself and provides support that generates loyalty rather than resentment. Catherine studied the financial projections with professional interest. And the creative people involved? They're genuinely independent. Completely. They own their work, control their careers, and can leave our programs at any time. The only requirement is that they use some of their success to support other emerging creators. The tech billionaire leaned back in his chair. So we've created a system where creative freedom generates more profit than creative control? We've proven that authenticity is the ultimate luxury commodity. And unlike other luxury goods, authenticity becomes more valuable when it's shared rather than hoarded. The Consortium voted unanimously to scale the Creative Freedom Initiative globally. Within a year, we operated in 50 countries with budgets that rivaled national education spending. Fashion, music, literature, visual arts, film, technology, architecture. Every creative discipline now had access to resources that supported independence rather than demanding submission. The impact was transformational. Creative industries that had been dominated by a few major corporations became diverse ecosystems of independent artists and innovative companies. Young people who had been tracked into corporate creative programs now had alternatives that respected their autonomy. But the most significant change was cultural. The idea that creative success required surrendering independence became outdated. A generation of artists grew up expecting support without strings, resources without obligations, opportunities without ownership transfers. I had become exactly what Catherine predicted, someone who controlled the creative economy. But instead of using that control to harvest talent, I had used it to liberate talent. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had accepted ultimate power over human creativity and used it to ensure no one else could ever have that power again. Success at this level came with isolation I hadn't anticipated. Marie remained my closest friend and primary collaborator, but everyone else in my life was either an employee, a beneficiary of our programs, or someone who wanted something from the initiative. Personal relationships became complicated when you controlled resources that could transform any artist's career. Dating was impossible when potential partners might be motivated by access to opportunities rather than genuine connection. Friendship was difficult when every social interaction carried implications for professional advancement. I lived in a beautiful apartment overlooking the Seine, traveled the world supporting creative projects, and had resources that could manifest any personal desire. But I was essentially alone with my power and its responsibilities. Late at night, when Paris was quiet and I worked alone in my office, I sometimes thought about my grandmother's sewing machine and my mother's exhaustion. They had never been alone because they had never been powerful enough to isolate themselves from human connection. Power protected me from exploitation, but it also protected me from intimacy. Success had given me everything I wanted except the simple human connections I hadn't realized I needed. 2 years into the global expansion, a new threat emerged that I hadn't anticipated. The Creative Freedom Initiative's success had inspired competitors. Not corporate competitors, but governmental ones. Several countries had launched their own creative support programs designed to identify and cultivate talent for national purposes. What started as artistic development programs became recruitment systems for soft power projection and cultural influence campaigns. They're weaponizing creativity, Marie said, showing me intelligence reports that Catherine's network provided. Using our model to identify artists who can serve state objectives. China's program offered resources comparable to ours, but required creative work that promoted national interests. Russia's initiative provided opportunities for artists willing to create content supporting government policies. Even democratic countries had launched programs that subtly channeled creative work toward politically useful narratives. We've created a global competition for creative loyalty, I realized. Countries are treating artists like strategic resources. The irony was crushing. In trying to free creativity from corporate control, I had inspired governmental control that could be even more restrictive and manipulative. Catherine called an emergency consortium meeting to address what she termed creative nationalism. The same conference room where I had signed the contract to revolutionize human creativity now hosted discussions about how to respond to governments treating artists as weapons in cultural warfare. This was predictable, the pharmaceutical executive said. Nations can't allow independent creative systems that operate outside their influence. Culture is too important to national identity and international competitiveness. So what do you suggest? I asked. We make the programs government-proof, Catherine replied. Create systems so decentralized and internationally integrated that no single nation can control or co-opt them. The solution was elegant and terrifying. Instead of supporting creativity through national programs, we would create a global creative citizenship that transcended national boundaries. Artists could access resources from anywhere, collaborate across continents, and build audiences that weren't limited by geography or politics. Essentially, we're creating a creative nation-state that exists independently of traditional governments, the tech billionaire explained. Artists become citizens of our system rather than just beneficiaries of our programs. The implications were staggering. Not just supporting independent creativity, but creating an independent creative society that operated parallel to traditional nation-states. And you think governments will allow this? Catherine's smile was sharp as winter. Governments will discover that trying to control creativity is like trying to control water. It finds ways around every barrier. The creative nation-state launched on a Tuesday that changed everything. Within 24 hours, 3 million artists in 96 countries had applied for creative citizenship. By the end of the week, several governments had declared our programs illegal within their borders. The response was swift and coordinated. Artists in authoritarian countries used our systems to create work their governments couldn't censor. Democratic nations found their cultural policies competing with alternatives that offered more freedom and better resources. But the most significant response came from unexpected sources. Religious leaders who saw creative freedom as moral corruption. Corporate executives whose business models depended on controlling creative content. Political movements that viewed independent creativity as a threat to social cohesion. I had thought the battle was between control and freedom. I was discovering it was between different visions of what human creativity should serve. Standing in my office overlooking Paris, reading reports of protests, legislation, and international diplomatic conflicts triggered by our creative nation-state, I realized I had started something that was spiraling beyond anyone's control. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You've created something beautiful and dangerous. But beauty and danger attract attention from forces you haven't considered yet. Some battles are won with money and influence. Others require different weapons. The real war is about to begin. Are you ready to fight for every creative person on Earth? Because that's what this has become. A friend who understands the stakes. I looked out at the city where my journey began, then at the global network of creative freedom I had built from the ashes of my own destruction. They were right. The real war was about to begin. And this time I wouldn't just be fighting for my own creative freedom. I would be fighting for the future of human imagination itself. Next episode preview. What started as my personal revenge became a global revolution. Now governments, corporations, and powerful interests I never imagined are mobilizing to destroy the creative nation-state I built. They think controlling creativity means controlling culture, identity, and the future itself. They're not wrong. But they underestimated what happens when millions of creative people discover they don't have to choose between freedom and success. The war for human imagination is about to determine whether creativity serves power or power serves creativity. Everything I've built is about to be tested.